The Pierre Hotel's grand ballroom glittered like a jewelry box left open on purpose. Crystal chandeliers burned white overhead. The air carried expensive perfume layered over stale champagne and something sharper, the metallic scent of ambition dressed up as charity. Beneath the music, there was a softer sound that never stopped, the hush of money moving in clusters, the small laughs that said, "I belong here." Vivian Clark stood near a marble pillar, still enough to be mistaken for part of the decor. A faded thrift store cardigan hung from her shoulders, damp at the cuffs from the condensation of the glass she had been holding. Her charcoal dress looked clean and pressed, but it did not shine. Her shoes were practical, orthopedic, the kind no one noticed until someone needed a reason to laugh. Wire-rimmed glasses sat on her nose, catching a thin line of chandelier light. A waiter drifted past with a tray. He hesitated, already scanning for someone more important. "Sparkling water with lime, please," Vivian said. He nodded and moved on. His polished shoes whispered across the carpet. Vivian did not mind being overlooked. Invisibility made the room honest. It made people careless. It made their faces loosen into what they really were when they thought no consequence was watching. Across the ballroom, a line of young socialites posed near an ice sculpture. Their laughter rose and fell on command. A senator clasped hands with a real estate mogul, their smiles tight, their eyes flat. Phones were everywhere, lifted like mirrors, hunting for angles that made the night look richer than it was. Then Tiffany Street Claire arrived and the room leaned toward her as if pulled by gravity. She was young, blonde, wrapped in a scarlet gown that clung to her like a second skin. Diamonds threw cold sparks at every turn of her head. She did not walk so much as claim space. On her arm, Grant Miller moved with the confidence of a man who believed the floor belonged to him. "Look at this place, babe," Grant said, loud enough for strangers to hear. "This is the big leagues." Tiffany giggled, a sound sharpened to a point. "You deserve it. You basically run the company anyway." Grant lifted a champagne flute without waiting for permission. "Arthur is just a figurehead. I am driving the numbers." Vivian watched from her pillar, her face calm, her eyes steady behind her glasses. Grant's voice carried over the band, over the clink of cutlery, over the faint splash of a fountain in the corner. He liked an audience. Tiffany liked a stage. Vivian glanced at her watch, battered leather, the kind you kept because it still worked. The second hand ticked with stubborn patience. 7:15. Her phone vibrated once against her palm. The screen was cracked in one corner. Traffic on 59th. 10 mins. Apologies. She read it and let her breath out slowly. 10 minutes. She could endure 10 minutes of perfume and ego. The band shifted into a brighter rhythm. People swayed without touching. Glasses lifted. A charity logo glowed on a screen near the dais, like a halo. Vivian stepped away from the pillar, angling toward the balcony doors where the air might be cooler. She moved carefully, not rushing, not drawing attention. The accident happened fast, the way humiliation always did. A young waiter hurried between bodies, trying to reach a donor whose glass was half empty. His foot caught the train of a woman's gown. The tray tipped, a heavy glass of red wine lifted into the air, spinning once under the chandelier light like a dark jewel. It did not land on the donor. It did not land on the waiter. It struck Tiffany's scarlet gown, bursting across her chest and spilling down the front of her dress in a spreading stain that looked almost black against the red. The music faltered. The room inhaled. For one sharp heartbeat, there was only silence and the soft drip of wine hitting carpet. Tiffany stared down at herself, frozen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out yet. Her hand hovered, as if she could push the stain back into the glass. Then her eyes lifted and found a target. Vivian stood beside the waiter, not touching him, not touching Tiffany, simply too near the blast radius of someone else's mistake. "You!" Tiffany shrieked. The sound cracked the ballroom's polished calm. Vivian blinked. A small motion. Controlled. "I beg your pardon, you clumsy, idiotic cow," Tiffany snapped, voice rising with each word. "Look what you did. Do you have any idea what this is? This is vintage Versace. It is worth more than your entire life." The waiter stammered apologies, hands shaking, face drained. His eyes darted between Tiffany's diamonds and Vivian's plain cardigan, as if trying to calculate which one could destroy him faster. "I did not touch you," Vivian said, evenly. He tripped. "It was an accident." "Do not you dare blame the help," Tiffany shouted, twisting the room toward her version of reality. "I saw her shove him. She was jealous because she stands there looking like a homeless librarian. And I am, well, me." A ripple of laughter moved through the nearest circle, the kind that asked permission first. Then more laughter followed, bolder, once it realized Tiffany wanted it. Grant stepped forward, his jaw tight, his skin flushing not from shame but from outrage on Tiffany's behalf. He looked Vivian up and down, letting his eyes linger on her shoes as if they were evidence. "Who even are you?" he demanded. "I do not recognize you. Are you with catering? Or did you just wander in off the street?" "I am a guest," Vivian said, clutching her worn handbag a little tighter. "Like you." "Like us," Tiffany barked, and the laugh turned cruel. "Honey, look around. There is no us. There is us, the people who belong, and then there is you." Phones rose higher. People leaned closer. A stained dress was a problem. A public shaming was entertainment. "Grant, get security," Tiffany commanded, stabbing the air with a manicured finger. "I want her thrown out, and she is paying for this dress." Vivien met Grant's gaze. "Mr. Miller." Grant stiffened. "How do you know my name?" Vivian's expression did not change. "I know everyone who works for Ethelgard." Grant's smile turned sharp. "Are you lecturing me about the company? I am the company. I am the vice president of sales, and you are a nobody, ruining my fiancé's night." "Fiancé," Vivian repeated, one eyebrow lifting a fraction. "Personnel files list you as single." Grant's face darkened. His fingers tightened around his glass. "She is a stalker," Tiffany declared, loud and bright. "Probably a deranged ex-employee. Look at her. She reeks of failure." Tiffany stepped closer, invading the space in front of Vivian's face. Jasmine, perfume, and malice hit like a wave. Her eyes were glittering, hungry for the moment the older woman would shrink. "My boyfriend runs this city," Tiffany hissed. "When we are done with you, you will not get a job scrubbing toilets." Two security guards in black suits pushed through the crowd, drawn by Tiffany's voice the way dogs followed a whistle. They sized up the scene in seconds. Their eyes landed on Grant's expensive suit, on Tiffany's diamonds, then settled on Vivian's damp cardigan. "Ma'am," the lead guard said. Vivian pulled her arm back before his hand could close. The motion was quick, clean. "I have not moved from this spot," she said, "and I advise you not to touch me again." Resisting, the guard muttered, already annoyed. "Do not make this hard. Walk out before we drag you out." "Drag her out," Tiffany sang, clapping once, delighted with her own cruelty. The crowd answered with laughter that sounded like coins dropped on marble. Vivian's glasses fogged at the edges. The lime on her tongue tasted bitter now. She looked around at the faces, at the phones, at the mouths, stretched into smiles that did not reach the eyes. She felt the weight of the room pressing in, heavy as velvet. Then she breathed in, slow, and her shoulders settled. "Very well," Vivian said quietly. "If you want me to leave, I will leave." Her gaze slid to Grant, steady as a ledger. "But if I walk out those doors, you should start updating your LinkedIn profile." Grant scoffed, thinking it was a bluff. "Get her out of here!" The guard's hand closed on Vivian's shoulder, rough, turning her toward the exit. And then a voice cut through the ballroom, deeper than music, sharper than laughter. "Stop." The word was not shouted, it was commanded. The guards froze mid-motion. The room fell silent, as if someone had pulled the power from the walls. Every head turned toward the double doors. A man stood there, framed by light, anger in his posture, authority in the way the air seemed to move around him. Arthur Pendleton had arrived. Arthur's presence held the room the way a hand holds a throat. The chandeliers kept glittering. The band sat poised with instruments half lifted. But the sound that mattered was smaller now. A single ice cube slipping in a bucket. A phone camera refocusing with a soft click. Someone swallowing too loudly. Vivienne did not turn fully at first. She felt the shift through the bodies around her, through the sudden stillness in the guard's grip. The hand on her shoulder loosened, uncertain. Authority had entered, and everyone's instincts recalculated. Her cardigan clung cold against her arms where wine had splashed earlier. The air seemed sharper, like the ballroom had cracked open and let winter in. She kept her spine straight anyway. Grant recovered first, the way ambitious men always tried to recover. He stepped into the silence with a practiced smile, already polishing a story into something flattering. "Arthur, thank God," Grant said, too loudly, filling the quiet like a stain. "We've had a security breach. This woman wandered in and assaulted Tiffany. We were just having security remove the trash." The word trash landed with a dull thud, and Vivian felt it in her teeth. She watched Arthur's eyes move past Grant without acknowledging him, tracking toward her the way a compass needle snaps to north. For a second, Arthur's face went blank. Not confusion, calculation. A flash of dread crossed it, like a man seeing a headline form in real time. Then he moved. He did not stroll. He marched across the carpet, dress shoes striking a clean, rhythmic pattern that cut through the silence. People parted without thinking, bodies peeling away to make a corridor. Vivian noticed hands lowering phones, not out of respect, but fear of being caught holding the wrong angle when power decided who was wrong. Arthur reached Grant and shoved him aside with one hard sweep of his arm. Grant stumbled into a waiter, champagne sloshing. "Let go of her," Arthur barked. The two guards stiffened. One started to speak, glancing toward Grant for permission. But Arthur stepped into his space like a storm. "Take your hands off her immediately," Arthur said, voice low and dangerous, "or I will have you arrested for assault." The guards released Vivian as if she had turned hot. Their palms left faint, damp marks on her sleeves. She swayed a fraction, then steadied herself. Her glasses slid slightly on her nose. She pushed them back with a slow, careful touch, refusing to look rattled. Arthur's hands moved to his own tuxedo jacket. He pulled it off in one smooth motion and draped it around Vivian's shoulders. The wool was heavy and warm, the first kind thing the room had offered her. His fingers pulled the lapels tight, shielding her from the stare of 300 hungry faces. "Are you hurt?" Arthur asked, and the question sounded like it was meant for her alone. Vivian looked up at him. Water clung at her lashes from the earlier splash, and wine clung in darker patches along her cardigan. Her breath was steady, but the cold had sunk into her skin. She could feel the tremor in her hands when she tried to adjust the jacket. "I'm cold, Arthur," she said, "and I'm disappointed." Arthur flinched, as if the words had struck his ribs. "I know. I am so sorry. Vivian's mouth tightened, not unkindly. It's not your fault the traffic is bad. Her eyes shifted, sharp behind the lenses. But it is your fault that your executives mistake arrogance for competence. Behind Arthur's shoulder, Tiffany stood frozen in her stained gown, lips parted in disbelief. Grant's face had gone pale with a kind of panic that didn't know where to attach itself. His confidence had been built for rooms like this, but it had never been tested against real authority. Grant tried to laugh it off. Arthur, I think there's a misunderstanding. You can't possibly know. She's a scam artist, Tiffany cut in, desperation making her voice brittle. Mr. Pendleton, she ruined my dress. She poured water on herself to play victim. She's clearly trying to get money. Billionaires don't dress like that. Arthur turned slowly. The warmth he had shown, Vivian vanished. His eyes swept Tiffany's diamonds, the wine stain, the dropped glass, Grant's sweating grin. The room seemed to shrink around his calm. A nobody, Arthur said, repeating Grant's word with a quiet disgust. Grant seized on it like a lifeline. Yes, she crashed the party. No invite. I was protecting the company's reputation. Arthur stared at him long enough that Grant's smile began to tremble at the edges. You think you're protecting Ethelgard, Arthur said. Of course, Grant replied. Too fast, always thinking of the company first. Arthur let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. He reached into his pocket and produced a handkerchief without looking away from Grant. He passed it back to Vivian as if he already knew exactly what she needed. Vivian took it. The silk was cool between her fingers. She dabbed her glasses once, then again, wiping slow, controlled circles. The small motion calmed something in her chest. The room watched her hands like they were watching a fuse burn. Grant swallowed. Tiffany's face tightened, trying to hold onto outrage as a shield. Arthur's voice carried to the back of the ballroom without rising. Grant, do you know why I am the CEO of this company? Grant blinked, thrown off script. Because you're a visionary. Wrong, Arthur said. A murmur stirred, surprised. People leaned in, sensing a fall. Vivian could hear the soft whine of a phone's autofocus, hunting for the right face. Arthur's shoulders stayed square, but his jaw clenched as if he was forcing himself not to explode. I am the CEO because years ago I was nothing, Arthur said, each word measured. A man no one would hire. A man sleeping in his car. A woman found me and gave me work when I didn't deserve it. She built what you're standing in. She hated the spotlight, so she hired me to hold it. Grant's lips parted. He stared at Vivian, like he was trying to reverse engineer her into a lie. No, he whispered. That's an urban legend. Vivian's eyes lifted from her glasses, and her voice sliced through the room with quiet authority. That's enough history lesson. Arthur stopped mid-breath. His head dipped a fraction. An involuntary bow. The crowd noticed. The crowd always noticed submission. Vivian stepped forward. The jacket hung oversized on her frame, her shoes still practical, her hair still pinned back with the same plastic clip. But she moved like the center of gravity had shifted under the ballroom. Like everyone else was the one standing on borrowed carpet. She looked at the guards first. You may go, she said calmly. You were following orders, however misguided. They backed away at once, almost stumbling in their rush to disappear. Then she turned her gaze to Grant. He had tried to make her small with laughter, with labels, with a hand on her shoulder. Now he looked like a man who had walked too far onto thin ice and heard it crack. Mr. Miller, Vivian said. Grant's throat bobbed. He couldn't answer. Sweat shone at his hairline. You asked who I am. She continued, her tone almost pleasant. She let the silence stretch just long enough for the phones to catch it, for the room to stop breathing, for Tiffany's outrage to curdle into fear. "My name is Vivian Clark," she said. "I am the founder, the majority shareholder, and the chair of the board of Ethelgard Holdings." The words didn't need volume. They had weight. She held Grant's gaze, steady as a signature line. "And until a few minutes ago, I owned the contract that pays your salary." The silence after her introduction was not empty. It was crowded with calculation. Vivian felt it in the way shoulders tightened, in the way people stopped blinking, in the way phones stayed raised but suddenly looked guilty to be there. Somewhere near the bar, an ice cube cracked sharply, and the sound carried like a bone snapping. Grant's face had gone slack, as if his features didn't know what expression belonged on them anymore. Tiffany, still dripping outrage, stared at Vivian's borrowed tuxedo jacket like it was an insult. "That's impossible," Tiffany said, too loud, too desperate. "If you were her, I would know. Your name would be on the website. Your photo would be everywhere." Arthur's eyes flicked to Vivian, cautious, as if he was waiting for her permission to speak. He held it. Vivian did not look at him. She didn't need reinforcement. She needed the room to understand that what mattered wasn't belief. It was structure. "I value my privacy," Vivian said, "and I value character tests." Grant swallowed. His fingers trembled around his champagne flute. The liquid inside sloshed against the glass, betraying him. "This is a misunderstanding," Grant tried, voice cracking into a nervous laugh. "Arthur, you can't be serious. She looks." Arthur's gaze turned flat. "Grant, don't." Vivian watched Grant's mind search for a lever, something that had worked before. A smile, a joke, a threat. He glanced at Tiffany for backup. Tiffany lifted her chin like she could still bully reality into compliance. "Mr. Pendleton," Tiffany insisted, "you're letting her manipulate you." She poured water on herself. "She's clearly—" Vivian's hand rose, palm outward. Not a dramatic gesture, a quiet stop sign. "Miss Street Claire," Vivian said, and Tiffany flinched at the sound of her own name on Vivian's tongue. "Step back." Tiffany didn't. She leaned in instead, perfume pushing forward, eyes bright with hate. Vivian's patience thinned into something colder. "Arthur," she said without turning her head. "The guest list." Arthur's phone was already in his hand. The screen lit his face from below, a clean rectangle of light. He tapped once, twice, a soft beep. He didn't read from it. He didn't need to. "She's on it," Arthur said. The confirmation hit the room like a drop in temperature. Several people lowered their phones. One man near the dais cleared his throat and suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Grant's lips moved, trying to form words. He looked at the guards, then at the exits, then at Vivian again. His eyes landed on her cardigan, damp and ordinary. He could not reconcile the fabric with the authority. Vivian took a slow breath and felt the tuxedo jacket settle warmer around her shoulders. She hated needing it. She hated that the room had watched her shiver and called it entertainment. Her gaze moved across the crowd, not sweeping dramatically, but noting who smiled, who looked away, who looked ashamed, who looked annoyed that the show had turned serious. Then she returned to Grant. "You called me trash," Vivian said. Grant flinched. I was trying to protect. "You were trying to impress a woman who screams for attention," Vivian corrected, and Tiffany's face tightened. "And you were trying to impress a room that confuses cruelty with power." Grant's jaw clenched. His voice came out smaller. "I didn't know. That was the point," Vivian said. "That was the entire point." Tiffany scoffed, trying to reclaim oxygen. "If you're the chair, then act like it. Fire him. Throw him out. Make him pay for my dress. The word pay made Vivian's mouth twitch, almost a smile, but it didn't soften her eyes. You care about payment, Vivian said. Interesting, considering you just tried to purchase dignity with volume. Tiffany's cheeks flushed. Don't talk to me like someone who matters. Vivian finished. Calm. You're not used to that. A few people made small sounds, half laughs that died immediately when Vivian's eyes flicked their way. The room learned quickly. Grant straightened, forcing his spine upright as if posture could rebuild authority. Mrs. Clark, he said, grabbing for respect like it was a rail. We can discuss this privately. In your office. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, Vivian repeated. Her voice stayed even, but her fingers tightened on the silk handkerchief. Tomorrow is what people say when they need time to hide evidence. Grant's eyes widened. That's ridiculous. Vivian tilted her head a fraction. Is it? Arthur didn't move, but the air around him sharpened. Vivian could feel his anger like heat at her shoulder, held back only because she hadn't released it. Grant's gaze darted to Arthur again, looking for an ally. Arthur gave him none. Vivian turned slightly, just enough to face Tiffany. The younger woman's lashes were still perfect despite the stain, despite the chaos. The diamonds still glittered, frantic little signals trying to insist everything was fine. Miss Street Claire, Vivian said. You poured water on me. Tiffany lifted her chin. It was an accident. Slippery hands. Vivian held her gaze, unblinking. Accidents are measured by intent. The room went still again, attentive, as if Vivian had placed a scalpel on the table. Grant forced a laugh. Desperate. This is insane. You're humiliating us over a spill. Vivian's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. Over a spill, he said, like that was the only thing that had happened. Like hands hadn't grabbed her. Like a mob hadn't chanted. Like Tiffany hadn't smiled while she did it. Humiliation is what you did, Vivian said. Accountability is what I'm doing. Grant's face twisted. You can't do this here. Not in front of everyone. Vivian looked around at the crowd. The bankers, the politicians, the donors, the influencers, the people who had watched cruelty bloom and laughed because they thought it was safe. This is exactly where it belongs, she said. Arthur's phone vibrated once in his hand. The brief buzz felt loud in the silence. Vivian didn't look away from Grant. You wanted the company's reputation protected, she said. Then, let the company see what it has been paying for. Grant's breathing quickened. Tiffany's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She looked ready to lunge again, but the guards had stepped back, uncertain now about whose orders mattered. Vivian's gaze dropped to Grant's wrist, to the sharp gleam of metal beneath his cuff. The watch caught chandelier light and threw it back like a flash of warning. Nice watch, she said softly. Grant blinked, thrown. What? Vivian didn't answer yet. She simply looked at it one beat longer, letting the room follow her eyes, letting attention lock onto the object like a target. Arthur, she said without looking away. External auditors. 8 a.m. Arthur's reply was immediate. Consider it done. Grant's face drained again. He understood the word auditors. He understood what it meant when it was spoken out loud, in public, where every phone could turn it into a headline. Tiffany's voice came out thin. You can't just call auditors because I got a drink spilled on me. Vivian finally looked up, meeting Tiffany's eyes. No, she said. I'm calling them because you chose to open your mouth. And in the frozen moment that followed, Vivian felt the room shift once more. Not toward Tiffany's sparkle, not toward Grant's confidence, but toward the quiet weight of consequences settling into place. Grant's throat worked like he was swallowing something sharp. The word auditors had changed the air, turned the ballroom's perfume into something sour. Vivian watched him try to stand taller inside his suit, as if fabric could shield him from math. Tiffany recovered faster, because Tiffany always recovered into noise. "This is harassment," she snapped. "You're doing this because you're jealous, because you're old and invisible," and Vivian's gaze stayed on Tiffany's face, calm as a closed door. The tuxedo jacket warmed her shoulders, but she could still feel the cold beneath her skin, the memory of water running down her neck like a verdict. "Jealous," Vivian repeated, tasting the word without emotion, of screaming. A few people in the crowd made small, startled sounds. Someone coughed to cover a laugh. Tiffany's lips tightened. Arthur shifted half a step behind Vivian, not beside her, not in front. He held position the way an aide held a door for someone who owned the building. Grant tried a different angle. "Mrs. Clark, we can handle this internally, privately. You don't want a scene." Vivian's eyes flicked to the phones, still hovering in the air. Screens glowed like tiny stages. Faces leaned in, hungry for fallout now that the power had flipped. "A scene," she said quietly, "is what you were enjoying when you thought I was powerless." Grant's jaw clenched. Tiffany's hands balled into fists. Vivian turned slightly, just enough to address the room without raising her voice. It was not a speech. It was an assessment. "You laughed," she said, eyes traveling across the nearest circle. "You filmed. You watched two guards grab a woman who hadn't moved an inch." The words landed heavier than shouting would have. Some people lowered their gaze, others kept staring, frozen, afraid of being selected next. Vivian's attention returned to the two guards, who hovered uncertainly at the edge of the circle, no longer sure which side of the room was safe. "You will not touch anyone again tonight," she said, "not without my direct instruction." "Yes, ma'am," one guard muttered, voice thick with embarrassment. Tiffany stepped forward anyway, anger pushing her into stupidity. "This is my event too. This is my night. You don't get to." Vivian lifted one finger, small and precise. Tiffany stopped mid-word, as if the gesture had physically pulled her up short. "Miss Street Claire," Vivian said, voice conversational. "You seem to believe volume is leverage." Tiffany sneered. "It works." Vivian's mouth curved slightly. "Only when no one important is listening." Arthur's eyes flicked toward Tiffany with something like pity, then away. He kept his silence, letting Vivian's calm do the damage. Grant's face glistened with sweat now. His gaze darted again to the exits, calculating distance, calculating who would block him, calculating how fast a lie could become a headline. Vivian saw it and understood the type. Men like Grant did not fear being wrong. They feared being documented. "Grant," she said. He flinched at his name like it was an electric shock. "Yes. Yes, ma'am." "5 minutes ago," Vivian continued, "I was a stray, a cow, a wet dog. Now you remember manners. Funny how the room teaches etiquette." Grant swallowed hard. "Mrs. Clark, I apologize. This got out of hand." "Out of hand," Vivian repeated, and her gaze dropped again to his wrist. The watch gleamed under chandelier light. Clean, sharp, new. It was the kind of object meant to announce status without words. Her eyes lifted back to his. "That watch is also out of hand." Grant blinked. "What are you talking about?" Vivian didn't answer with a paragraph. She answered with an action. "Arthur," she said. Arthur's phone was already unlocked. He held it up, angling the screen toward her without stepping closer, like presenting evidence to a judge. The blue-white glow lit Vivian's glasses. Vivian read silently. Her face remained steady, but inside, she felt the satisfying click of a pattern aligning. Then she looked up. Nice, Patek. Grant, she said softly. Purchased last month. 7:42 p.m. Corporate card. The receipt was filed under client entertainment, but the vendor name isn't a restaurant. A collective intake of breath traveled through the crowd, not because they cared about fraud, because they understood detail, like that was a blade. Grant's lips parted. That's not. Vivian tilted her head a fraction. Not what? Tiffany snapped her head toward Grant, suspicion sharpening her features. You bought that, with the company card. Grant's face went tight. Tiffany. Not now. Vivian watched Tiffany's outrage pivot. It was almost impressive how quickly her anger found a new target when the status narrative shifted. Vivian let it happen for one beat, then closed it. This is not a couple's argument, she said. This is governance. She turned her gaze to the audience again, letting them feel included in the consequence. Mr. Miller has been congratulating himself for numbers tonight, she said. He enjoys applause. So we will discuss his numbers where applause can hear it. Grant's breathing quickened. You can't just... I can, Vivian said, calm. And I will. She held up the silk handkerchief, now damp from her glasses, and folded it once. The small, neat motion felt louder than shouting. It told the room she was not emotional. She was deliberate. Grant, she said, do you remember the quarterly report you submitted last week? Grant's voice came out thin. Yes. You claimed a 20% increase in regional efficiency, Vivian said. You attributed it to management improvements. Yes, ma'am. It was a team effort. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly behind her lenses. Team effort. Interesting. Because your report's footnotes say you cut customer support staff by 40% and outsourced to a vendor in a different time zone. Grant's cheeks flushed. That was a strategic realignment. Vivian's tone stayed even. Customer complaints are up. Calls go unanswered. Response time doubles. You saved money on paper to inflate your bonus, while strangling the brand quietly. The crowd murmured, shifting. Some faces looked confused, others looked fascinated. This was the kind of punishment money people feared most, being corrected in public with specifics. Grant shook his head, trying to regain momentum. Those numbers can be interpreted, Vivian interrupted with a single word. No, it was not loud. It was final. And then there's the matter of the buyback clauses with your distributors, she said. Grant's eyes widened so fast it was almost comical. Tiffany blinked, not understanding, but sensing danger. What buyback clauses? Tiffany demanded. Grant didn't answer. His silence was a confession. Vivian watched it settle into him, watched the room catch the scent of blood. You've been stuffing the channel, Vivian said, voice steady, forcing product onto distributors to inflate this quarter's sales. Next quarter, they return it. It's a classic fraud. Lazy. Illegal. Grant's face went gray. Arthur's jaw tightened behind her. Vivian turned to Arthur without raising her voice. Auditors. 8A. M. External. Forensic. Arthur nodded once. Done. A phone somewhere near the front beeped as it hit record again. Louder now in the hush. Grant's knees softened. He grabbed the edge of a table to steady himself. Knuckles white. You can't do this to me, he whispered. Vivian looked at him with a cool, almost gentle expression. You do, she said. And you should consider using one of them right now. Grant blinked, confused. Vivian's mouth twitched. The faintest edge of dark humor. The right to remain silent, she said, because every word you add tonight becomes evidence. Tiffany's face twisted as the reality finally pierced her shield. She stared at Grant like he was suddenly the cheap fabric under a luxury label. The room held its breath. Not for Tiffany's dress, not for the gala. For the moment the peacock realized the lioness was done watching. Vivian stepped closer to Grant, just enough for him to smell the faint lime on her breath, the clean soap on her skin, the absence of desperation. "Stand up," she said quietly. "You're embarrassing yourself." Grant's legs shook, but he forced himself upright. Vivian looked past him, over the crowd, into a room that had laughed at her 5 minutes ago. Then she spoke again, not as an explanation, but as a decision. "Fired," she said, "would be too easy." Vivian let the word easy hang for a beat, long enough for it to sour in the mouths of the people who had been enjoying the spectacle. She watched Grant's eyes flick from face to face, searching for a rescuer. No one moved. Even Tiffany's anger had shifted into survival math. Grant's voice came out hoarse. "Mrs. Clark, please, we can negotiate. I can fix this." Vivian's gaze dropped to the edge of the nearest round table. A linen cloth, starched smooth, a place card trembling slightly from someone's restless fingers. The tiny details were always honest. "You can't fix a lie by stacking more lies on top of it," she said. Grant straightened his tie. A reflex, like adjusting fabric, could reattach dignity. "I've made this company millions." Vivian nodded once, as if acknowledging a statement in a report. "And you've been subtracting from it for 2 years." She turned to Arthur. Her voice stayed calm, but it carried cleanly to the back of the ballroom. "Have legal pull his executive contract tonight." The misconduct clause. Arthur's thumb moved over his phone. A soft tap. Another. A quiet beep that sounded obscene in the hush. Grant's face tightened. "You can't do that. In public." Vivian's mouth curved slightly. "You tried to drag me out in public." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the bar looked down at their drink, as if it had become suddenly complicated. Vivian took one step closer to Grant. Not threatening, precise. Close enough that he could see his own sweat reflected faintly in her lenses. "Your contract is very specific," she said. "If you're terminated for gross misconduct, you forfeit severance, stock options, and bonus." Grant's lips parted. That's not fair." Vivian's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Fair is paying people for work, not paying you to steal." She looked at Arthur again. "Forensic team, first thing in the morning, sales division, expenses, vendor contracts, everything." Arthur's reply came immediately. Grant's breath hitched. His chest rose too fast, like he was trying to outrun the room's air. Tiffany's voice cut in, sharp, panicked. "What does that mean? What did you do?" Grant didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on Vivian like she was an avalanche he wanted to reason with. Vivian held his gaze. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You padded expense reports," she said. "You pushed inventory with buyback clauses to inflate this quarter. You used people's jobs like spare change." Grant shook his head. "Weak. You can't prove." Vivian lifted the silk handkerchief again, wiping a small, fogged corner of her glasses with slow circles. The motion was almost tender. It made the threat feel inevitable. "Prove is a process," she said. "And you've already helped." Grant went still. Vivian's eyes flicked to the phones in the air, to the hungry faces, to the fact that Grant had been performing for them all night. She could use that. She raised her chin slightly, not to address the room as a crowd, but as a record. "Arthur," she said, "external auditors by 8, and IT lock his access when we leave this ballroom." Arthur didn't hesitate. "Understood." Grant's pupils widened. "Wait. You can't just cut my—" Vivian's tone stayed mild. "I can." She turned slightly, letting her gaze land on Tiffany. The younger woman's face was tight with fury that couldn't find a safe place to land. "Tiffany," Vivian said. Tiffany flinched, as if she hated the involuntary reaction. "Don't say my name, like you, like I can end your night with a sentence," Vivian finished softly. Tiffany's throat worked. Her eyes flicked around the room, searching for allies. The people who had laughed with her earlier now watched her like a reality show character about to be written off. "You cared about value," Vivian continued, voice almost curious. "You called my shoes a joke. You called my clothes proof I didn't belong." Tiffany lifted her chin, trying to summon arrogance like armor. "Because it's true." Vivian stepped closer. She didn't touch Tiffany's shoulder. She didn't need to. She reached out and lightly pinched the edge of the scarlet fabric near the wine stain, careful, delicate, like a jeweler testing weight. Tiffany jerked back. "Don't touch me!" Vivian's fingers released the fabric immediately. The gesture was brief, but it drew the room's eyes to the hem, to the stitching, to the lie Tiffany had been wearing like a crown. "Interesting," Vivian said, looking at the dress without contempt. "Versace uses a double blind stitch on their hems. This one is a simple machine serge." A hush moved across the women nearest the circle. They leaned in, instinctively, because they understood clothes the way lawyers understood contracts. Tiffany's face drained. "What are you talking about?" Vivian's gaze lifted to Tiffany's eyes. "I'm saying your dress is counterfeit." A collective gasp snapped through the ballroom, sharper than laughter had been. Counterfeit was not an insult. It was social homicide. Tiffany's voice rose, shrill with panic. "You're lying. Grant bought this in Paris." Vivian looked at Grant. Grant's jaw clenched. He did not answer. Vivian let the silence do what words didn't have to. She could almost hear Tiffany's world cracking, the way confidence cracked when it realized it had been built on someone else's fraud. Tiffany stared at Grant, realization blooming into rage. "You told me it was real." Grant finally spoke, but his voice was small. "Tiffany," she cut him off with a sound that was half scream, half sob. She reached up, yanked off one towering stiletto, and swung. The shoe hit Grant's shoulder with a dull smack. Then again. Then again. "You cheap, lying bastard." The crowd recoiled, delighted and horrified at once. Phones caught the angle. The humiliation had changed victims. Vivian didn't flinch. She simply watched, letting the chaos reveal itself. "Security," she said calmly. The same guards who had tried to remove Vivian moments earlier surged forward at the sound of her voice. Their hands grabbed Tiffany's arms, restraining her. Grant stumbled backward, trying to shield his head, suit wrinkling, tie skewed. "Escort Mr. Miller and his guest out," Vivian commanded, "and deactivate his access badge before he reaches the lobby." Arthur's phone made a soft beep as if confirming an order had been received somewhere in the building's nervous system. Grant jerked against the guards. "You can't." I built." Vivian's eyes held him steady. "You were a guest in my house," she said quietly, "and you forgot your manners." Tiffany screamed as she was dragged, mascara smearing, one shoe missing. The scarlet dress now stained with wine and exposed as a lie. Grant's expensive watch flashed wildly under the chandeliers as he fought, then sagged when he realized fighting only made him look smaller. As the doors swallowed them, the ballroom stayed frozen. The sound of the heavy doors closing was final, a deep wooden thud that echoed like a gavel. For a moment, no one spoke. Vivian stood in the center of the polished room, still damp under the jacket, her hair pinned back, her glasses clear again. She looked at the crowd that had laughed at her, and now didn't dare breathe. Please enjoy the wine, she said, voice steady. It's on the house. A few people forced nervous smiles, not sure if they were allowed. Vivian's gaze moved across the room like a quiet scan. But remember this, she added. Money is loud. Power is silent. She turned her head toward Arthur. I'm going home, she said. I need warmth. Arthur's posture softened, relief and shame mingling in his expression. Yes, ma'am. And as Vivian began to walk toward the exit, the crowd didn't just part, they lowered their eyes. The heavy oak doors closed behind Vivian, and the ballroom's warmth sealed itself away like a secret. Outside, Fifth Avenue bit back. A cold drizzle slicked the pavement until it gleamed, turning city lights into smeared gold and white. The air smelled of wet stone, exhaust, and rain-soaked wool. Arthur opened a large black umbrella over her without a word. The canopy caught the rain with a soft, constant patter, a private sound in the open street. Vivian walked beside him toward the waiting town car. The Bentley was matte black and understated, built like a vault. Its chrome did not shout. It simply existed. Arthur held the rear door. The leather inside looked warm enough to forgive the night. Vivian slid in, the tuxedo jacket still draped over her shoulders. The fabric carried a faint trace of cologne and ballroom air, but the chill under her skin hadn't left yet. She pulled the jacket tighter and watched rain streak down the tinted window. Arthur folded the umbrella and climbed into the front passenger seat. The door shut with a heavy, cushioned thump. The car's cabin grew quieter, insulated from the city's noise. A faint hum of the engine idled beneath the silence, like a heartbeat. You were hard on him, Arthur said at last, voice low, careful. Vivian kept her eyes on the rain. It wasn't applause she heard in her head. It was the chant, the laughter, the scrape of a guard's hand on her shoulder. Cold memories left a residue. I was precise, she said. Arthur's shoulders rose slightly, then fell. In the dim light, his profile looked older than it had inside the ballroom. Cruelty is emotional, Vivian continued. Justice is mathematical. He has been subtracting from the company. Tonight, I balanced the equation. Arthur's fingers tightened on his phone as if he wanted to say something else, then decided against it. The driver eased the car forward, tires whispering through shallow puddles. Vivian didn't reach for her own phone. She didn't need it to know the room was already turning into a clip. She could almost feel the upload happening, the captions forming, the outrage packaged into entertainment. She had learned long ago that the internet was a mirror that only reflected what it wanted. She stared at the rain instead and thought about customer support floors that never made magazine covers, desks with coffee rings, headsets pressed to tired ears, people who got yelled at for mistakes they didn't make, the ones Grant had cut because a number looked cleaner when a human was removed. The Bentley rolled to a stop at a light. Reflected in the window, Vivian's face looked pale, her glasses catching faint city glow. She looked the way she always looked. Pleasant, forgettable. The jacket on her shoulders was the only visible sign that the room had tried to hurt her. Outside, 50 yards down the sidewalk, consequences were less elegant. Grant and Tiffany stood under the weak wash of a street lamp, dumped onto the wet pavement like discarded props. The rain stuck Tiffany's hair to her cheeks. One shoe was missing, leaving her uneven, one heel stabbing the concrete, the other foot bare and pale against the dark sidewalk. Her scarlet dress clung to her, wine stains spreading like a bruise. Grant's suit jacket was torn at the shoulder, where security had grabbed him. His tie hung crooked. The shine in his smile had been stripped away, leaving only a frantic man with a phone in his hand. "Call the driver!" Tiffany shrieked, shivering so hard her diamonds trembled. "Get the limo here. Now." Grant's thumb jabbed at his screen, too fast, too desperate. The phone's glow lit the sweat on his upper lip. His breathing came in short pulls. "I can't," he whispered. Tiffany froze. "What do you mean you can't?" Grant stared at his screen as if the words on it were a death sentence. "My accounts. The company card. The business profile. My rides. Everything linked to Ethelgard. It's suspended. All of it." Tiffany's eyes widened. The idea didn't compute. She was used to money being a constant background hum, like air. She had never imagined the hum could stop mid-song. "So we're stranded," she said, voice cracking. Grant swallowed, glancing back toward the hotel doors as if they might reopen and spit him back into warmth. They stayed shut. Tiffany hugged her handbag to her chest like it could protect her from reality. "I don't carry cash," she snapped. "I carry a Birkin." She said the word like it was a passport. Then her gaze flicked to the stitching, the leather, and her mouth tightened. "Although God knows if this is even real now." Grant didn't answer. His eyes looked hollow. "Did you buy it in Chinatown too?" Tiffany hissed, rage turning sharp again. Grant's jaw clenched. "Shut up, Tiffany. I'm trying to think." "Think about what?" she spat. "How you're going to jail." Grant ignored her and stabbed his finger at the screen again. He dialed a number. The call rang once, twice. Then a smooth, automated voice slid into his ear. "This is Stan. Please leave a message." Grant ended the call with a curse that sounded ripped out of him. He looked up and scanned the street like a man seeing it for the first time. Yellow cabs passed, water hissing under their tires, but none slowed. "We need a cab," he muttered, voice flattening. "Or the subway." The word subway came out like a slur. Tiffany stared at him, as if he'd suggested sleeping in the gutter. "You're joking," she said. Grant's eyes snapped to hers. The charm was gone. The polished VP was gone. All that remained was survival. "I need my laptop," he said, "before they lock me out of the servers. If I can delete the emails." Tiffany lunged forward, grabbing his sleeve. "You're leaving me." Grant yanked his arm free. "Don't cling to me." Her face twisted, mascara beginning to run in dark streaks. "You promised me. You told me you ran this company." Grant laughed once, harsh and humorless. "And you believed me because you wanted a crown." Tiffany's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Grant stepped backward, already moving. "You poured water on the owner of the company," he said, voice low with disgust. "Do you understand that? You didn't just ruin my job. You set fire to my life." Tiffany's eyes flashed. "You did this. You lied to me." Grant's shoulders tightened. "You spent 6 months burning my bonus on garbage," he snapped. "We're done. Find your own ride." He turned and started walking fast, then faster, then broke into a run toward the subway entrance, disappearing down the stairs as if he could outrun the consequences chasing him. Tiffany stood alone on Fifth Avenue, one bare foot on wet concrete, rain dripping from her hair, her scarlet dress heavy and cold. A taxi sped past and hit a puddle. Dirty water splashed up, painting her legs with street filth. She lifted her hand to hail it anyway, shaking, mouth open in a silent plea. The driver looked at her once and accelerated. For the first time in her life, Tiffany Street Claire was truly invisible. Morning arrived without softness. Ethelgard Holdings rose from the financial district like a blade of glass, reflecting a gray sky that looked tired of watching people lie. Inside, the 41st floor was usually quiet, padded with carpet and controlled voices. Today it felt like a crime scene staged in real time. Vivian stepped out of the elevator at exactly 7. The doors opened with a clean ding that sounded too cheerful for the mood. Cool air carried the scent of fresh coffee and printer toner. undercut by something sharper, like overheated circuits. The corridor lights were bright and unforgiving, turning every reflection in the glass walls into a witness. She wore a tailored navy suit now, crisp and severe. Her hair was pinned back with military precision. The cardigan and wine were gone, but the cold memory of them still sat under her skin. Her glasses were spotless. Her expression was calm enough to be mistaken for indifference. Arthur was waiting by the conference room doors. He looked like he had slept in his clothes. His tie was slightly crooked, and there was a faint red line across his thumb where he had been gripping his phone too long. The forensic accountants were already inside, 4 of them, laptops open, cables snaking across the table like veins. Catherine Pierce, head of legal, stood at the far end of the room, posture straight, eyes sharp as cut glass. A file sat in front of her with a yellow tab labeled Miller. Vivian walked to the head of the table and sat without ceremony. "Coffee," she said. Arthur slid a black mug toward her. The ceramic was warm against her palm. She took one sip. Bitter, clean, necessary. "It's worse than we thought," Arthur said. Vivian didn't react. She looked at the projection screen. "Show me." Catherine stood and tapped her remote. The screen shifted from a blank blue to a web of boxes and lines. Company names stacked like dominoes, arrows pointed outward, then back in, then out again. The pattern wasn't complicated. It was greedy. "We accessed Miller's private drives at 3 a.m., Catherine said. "The channel stuffing is just the surface." Vivian felt something settle in her stomach, cold and heavy, the way she used to feel before signing a contract that would change 1,000 lives. She kept her face still. "Continue," she said. Catherine pointed to one box on the screen. Red Lion Consulting. A ripple of quiet discomfort moved around the table. Even the auditors looked slightly offended by how obvious the name was. Every time Mr. Miller signed a vendor contract for Ethelgard, Catherine said, he forced the vendor to pay a consulting fee to Red Lion. If they refused, he threatened to cancel their contract. One of the auditors pulled up a document on his laptop and mirrored it to the screen. An invoice appeared, bland font, clean header, a bank routing number, a line item titled Advisory Services. At the bottom was a date and time stamped in gray, the kind of detail that never lied. Vivian stared at the timestamp, a small, intimate detail. Someone had been sitting somewhere, sending this, pressing enter, believing they would never be seen. "How much?" Vivian asked. Arthur answered before Catherine could. 4 million over 3 years. That's how he funded the penthouse, the cars, the lifestyle. He wasn't just cooking books. He was robbing the ecosystem. Vivian set her mug down with a soft clack that made the room go still. She didn't care about the money, the way other people cared about money. She cared about what it meant when rot had taken root and no one had pulled it out. "Who else knew?" she asked quietly. "A scheme like this doesn't run on one ego." Arthur hesitated. His eyes flicked to Catherine. Vivian's gaze sharpened behind her glasses. "Spit it out." Catherine's voice softened. Not out of kindness, but because she knew the blow would land harder that way. "We found emails," she said, "between Mr. Miller and the Regional Director of Human Resources, Peter Vance." For a fraction of a second, Vivian's throat tightened. Not grief, disbelief. Peter's face appeared in her mind with uncomfortable clarity, polite smile, careful handshake, the way he used to bring in photos of his daughter at school events. The man who had once thanked her with tears when she quietly handled a tuition bill after his wife got sick. Vivian stood and walked to the window. Below, the city moved like it always did, indifferent and efficient. Tiny people flowed between buildings, Yellow taxis cut through wet streets. From up here, everything looked manageable. From up here, the world always lied about how small it was. Peter suppressed whistleblower reports. Catherine continued. 3 junior employees flagged the Red Lion payments. Peter fired them for performance issues and buried their files. Miller paid him $10,000 a month to keep the lid on. Vivian's reflection in the glass stared back at her. The navy suit made her look like exactly what she was. Authority. But she could still see last night's wet cardigan in the shape of her shoulders. "Where is Peter now?" she asked, not turning around. Arthur answered. "In his office. He swiped in a few minutes ago. He doesn't know we have the emails." Vivian closed her eyes once, a brief shut of the world. When she opened them, her decision was already made. "Bring him here," she said, "and call the New York Police Department Financial Crimes Division. I want them waiting in the lobby." Arthur's voice tightened. "Vivian, Peter has been with us for a decade. If we arrest him publicly, if we don't," she cut in, "we are complicit." She turned from the window and faced the room. Her eyes landed on each person at the table like a quiet roll call. "This company is a family," Vivian said. "And when someone brings rot into the house, you don't paint over it. You cut it out." The auditors exchanged glances. Catherine's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly around the remote. "Keep digging," Vivian ordered. "I want every cent he moved, every vendor, every approval trail." One of the tech auditors nodded, typing faster. The keys clicked in rapid bursts, a dry, urgent rhythm. Arthur shifted, hesitation returning like a shadow. "There's another issue." Vivian's gaze held him. "What?" Catherine checked her tablet. "Grant Miller is missing. He never went home last night. His building's doorman hasn't seen him." Vivian felt a thin line of irritation cut through her calm. Cowards usually ran home. If he wasn't hiding, he was doing something worse. "Check his access logs," she said, "the last hour before we cut him off." The young auditor's fingers flew. The conference room speakers hummed softly as a server connection opened. A list populated on the screen. Login times, IP addresses, file names. The neatness of it made Vivian's jaw tighten. Theft always tried to look professional. "He accessed the server remotely," the auditor said, voice tight. "Downloaded customer lists, proprietary code, internal projections." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "He's trying to sell us out," the auditor swallowed. "He also searched flight schedules. Multiple routes. One way." Arthur's face went pale. "Where?" The auditor hesitated, as if the word itself was dangerous. "Brazil." Vivian's mouth went still. A flight wasn't a vacation. It was an escape route. "Who would buy stolen data from a man under investigation?" Arthur asked. Vivian didn't hesitate. "Bradford Sterling," she said. "Omnicorp. He's been circling our algorithm for years." The room went quiet again, but it wasn't shock this time. It was readiness. The calm before action. Vivian checked her watch. The second hand ticked with the same stubborn patience it had last night. The world had been counting down without her noticing. "Freeze his passport," she said. "Alert Port Authority. And get me a car." Arthur straightened. "Where are you going?" Vivian's eyes hardened. "To where desperate men go when they think they still have a deal left." She reached for her coffee and took one last sip. It had cooled, bitter on her tongue. "He won't sell us in a boardroom," she said. "He'll sell us somewhere cheap." And as the screens continued to glow with timestamps and file names, Vivian felt the next stage of the night's humiliation turn into something cleaner. A hunt. Hell's Kitchen looked nothing like Fifth Avenue. The streets were narrower, the sidewalk stained with old rain and newer grease. Neon buzzed in damp air. A diner sign flickered between letters, as if it couldn't decide whether it wanted to be seen. Inside, the light was too bright for the hour, and too tired for comfort. Vinyl booths squeaked when bodies shifted. The air smelled like fryer oil, burnt coffee, and wet coats steaming themselves dry. A ceiling fan turned slowly, clicking once every rotation like a cheap metronome. Vivian walked in first. She didn't wear a coat over her suit. She didn't need one. The room's heat hit her face, and she let it. Her shoes made a soft, steady sound on the tile. Arthur followed a half-step behind. Not looming, not performing. Two detectives came in after him, plain clothes, hands close to their belts, eyes scanning without drama. Vivian's gaze moved across the booths until it found Grant. He sat hunched at the far back, shoulders rounded as if he were trying to fold himself into the vinyl. His suit looked slept in, wrinkled at the elbows, collar limp. The shine had gone from his hair. He kept tapping his foot against the metal booth base, a nervous rhythm that matched the clicking fan. Across from him sat Bradford Sterling. Sterling didn't hunch. He occupied the booth like it belonged to him. Pinstripe suit, immaculate. Hands clean, nails trimmed. His eyes were calm, predatory, the kind that measured people the way investors measured risk. A small cup of coffee sat in front of him untouched, cooling like a prop. Between them, on the table, a silver USB drive rested beside a crumpled napkin. It looked absurdly small for the kind of damage it could do. Grant leaned forward, voice low and urgent. The drive has everything. Client lists, Q4 projections, the algorithm. I want 5 million and a plane ticket. Sterling picked up the USB between two fingers as if it might leave a stain. If this is real, he said, 5 million is a bargain. It's real, Grant whispered, eyes wet with desperation. I pulled it myself. I just need a way out. Sterling smiled without warmth. Desperate men always say that. They always think the word need makes theft respectable. Vivian didn't announce herself. She stopped in the doorway for a beat, letting the diner's cheap bell above the frame give a single, tired jingle. Not loud. Enough. A few heads turned. A waitress paused mid-step, coffee pot hovering. The room felt the difference the way a body feels a cold draft. Grant saw her first. His face drained so fast it looked like the light had been switched off behind his skin. His hand tightened around the edge of the booth, knuckles whitening. Sterling looked up next, calm as ever. His eyes flicked to Vivian's suit, to Arthur's presence, to the detectives behind them. He did not look surprised. He looked amused. Vivian walked toward the booth in a straight line, her steps quiet but certain. The tile under her shoes was slightly sticky from old syrup. She felt it with every step. The diner's smell clung to the back of her throat, crude and honest. Grant tried to stand. His knees scraped the booth seat with a squeal. Vivian raised one hand, palm down. Sit, Grant, she said. He sat. It wasn't obedience. It was gravity. Sterling leaned back slightly, as if settling in for entertainment. Vivian Clark, he said, voice smooth. Quite a show last night. Vivian didn't give him the courtesy of reacting. Her eyes went to the USB in Sterling's fingers. If you take that drive, Bradford, she said calmly, you are receiving stolen property. That's a felony. Sterling's mouth twitched. Allegedly stolen. Vivian nodded toward the detectives. Their presence made the word allegedly feel thin. Worth an FBI raid, she asked, for a bargain-priced betrayal. Sterling's gaze held hers, weighing. He glanced toward Grant, who was trembling now, a man watching his only exit close. Sterling's eyes narrowed a fraction, and Vivian could see the calculation behind them. Risk, optics, likelihood of outcome. He turned the USB over once, slow, as if listening for truth inside plastic. Then he tossed it onto the table. It clacked against the laminate and spun in place before stopping near Grant's hand like a coin landing on its edge. "You make a compelling argument," Sterling said. "Grant, I think I'll pass." Grant lunged for the USB, but one of the detectives stepped forward and placed a hand on the table, blocking the move without touching Grant. The gesture was small, controlled, more humiliating than force. Sterling slid out of the booth with smooth efficiency, coat never wrinkling. He looked at Vivian as if he were leaving a cocktail party. "No hard feelings," he said. "Business is business." Vivian's eyes stayed flat. "And crimes are crimes." Sterling's smile thinned. He walked toward the door without hurrying, neon light reflecting briefly in his hair. The bell jingled again as he left, and the diner's atmosphere exhaled like it hadn't realized it was holding its breath. Grant's eyes tracked Sterling through the window until the rival's silhouette dissolved into rain and traffic. "No," Grant said, voice breaking. Vivian slid into the booth opposite him, sitting with quiet control. Arthur remained standing at her shoulder. The detectives shifted closer, the space tightening around Grant like a net. Grant's hands shook on the tabletop. His coffee sat untouched, a skin forming on the surface. "Why?" Grant blurted, voice rising with panic. "I made you millions. I just wanted my share. I wanted to matter." Vivian watched him as if watching a malfunctioning machine. She could almost see the gears. Vanity, hunger, fear. The way he had mistaken applause for ownership. "You think status is what you wear," she said. "You thought that watch gave you a spine. You thought a title made you untouchable." Grant's breath hitched. "You don't understand. In those rooms, if you're not somebody, you're nothing." Vivian's gaze didn't soften. "You were somebody," she said quietly. "You were employed, trusted, paid. You chose to become nothing." The detective on Vivian's right reached into his jacket and pulled out an evidence bag. Clear plastic, white strip at the top, a small space for date, time, signature. It looked boring, which was exactly what made it powerful. The detective placed the bag on the table, then set the USB beside it. He pulled a small stamp from his pocket, the kind that left inked time with a firm press. Vivian watched Grant's eyes lock onto the bag. The reality of procedure hit him harder than any insult. Procedure didn't care about charm. It didn't care about excuses. Grant's voice dropped into a pleading whisper. "Vivian, please." Vivian held his gaze, steady behind her glasses. She didn't answer with anger. She answered with a decision. The detective lifted the USB with a napkin, slipped it into the evidence bag, and sealed it shut with a slow, audible strip of adhesive. Rip. The sound was small, but it sliced the booth into before and after. The detective stamped the top. Thunk. He wrote the time with neat block letters, then turned the bag toward Vivian. "Chain of custody," he said. Vivian signed without hesitation. Her pen scratched the plastic with a dry, final sound. Grant stared at her signature as if it were the moment his life ended. Then the second detective stepped forward. "Grant Miller," he said, "you are under arrest." Metal cuffs clicked around Grant's wrists. The sound was clean, mechanical, and merciless. Grant's shoulders sagged. His head dipped. The man who had once filled ballrooms with his voice was reduced to breath and regret in a booth that smelled like grease. As the detectives lifted him, Grant looked at Vivian one last time, eyes red, face broken. "Was any of it real?" he whispered. "Did I ever matter?" Vivian's expression stayed calm. You mattered, she said, until you chose theft over character. And then she watched him get walked out into the wet neon, where the diner bell jingled once more, indifferent to the end of a king who had never been one. The rain outside had thickened into a steady sheet, turning the street into a shallow mirror. Patrol lights flashed against wet brick and puddles, red and blue smearing across the diner window like spilled paint. The cold hit Grant the moment the door opened, sharp enough to make him gasp. He tried to pull his hands apart out of habit, but the cuffs held. The metal bit into his wrists with every small movement, a constant reminder that control had changed owners. A detective guided him toward an unmarked car with a firm hand at his elbow. It wasn't rough. It didn't need to be. Procedure was stronger than cruelty. Vivian stepped out after them, the diner's greasy warmth falling away behind her. The street smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust. Her hair stayed perfectly pinned. Her suit looked untouched by the weather, though rain dotted the shoulders in tiny dark marks. Arthur held the umbrella over her again, but she barely noticed it. Her attention stayed on Grant, on the way his shoes splashed through shallow water, on the way he kept trying to lift his chin and failing. At the curb, Grant stopped walking for a half beat, as if his legs had finally remembered pride. "You're doing this because you hate me," he said, voice cracking, trying to force accusation into something that sounded like power. Vivian looked at him the way she looked at a bad number on a report. "I don't hate you," she said. "Hate is personal. You were a position. You abused it." Grant's breath came fast, fogging in the cold air. "I gave you results. I did what everyone does. I just did it better." The detective opened the car door. The interior light spilled onto Grant's face, pale and slick with rain. Grant twisted, turning his head back toward Vivian, desperation sharpening his words. "Status is everything," he said. "In those rooms, you either win or you vanish." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly behind her glasses. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "In those rooms, you either have character or you get exposed." Grant let out a broken laugh. "Character doesn't buy a penthouse." Vivian's mouth tightened. "No, but it keeps you from ending up here." The detective guided Grant into the back seat. The plastic divider and vinyl smelled like disinfectant and old sweat, a scent of consequences that didn't care about titles. Grant sat awkwardly, wrists cuffed in front, knees pressed against the seat. He looked out through the rain-streaked window at Vivian. His face had a childlike confusion now, as if he couldn't understand why the world hadn't bent to his narrative like it always had. "You're going to destroy me," he whispered. Vivian held his gaze, calm and unwavering. "You destroyed yourself," she corrected. "You just didn't think anyone would document it." The car door shut with a heavy clack. The sound was clean, final. The vehicle pulled away, tires hissing through rainwater, taillights fading into the blur of neon and street lamps. Vivian stood still under the umbrella, watching the car vanish. The city moved on around her. A pedestrian hurried past with a hood pulled tight. A delivery bike splashed through a puddle, chain rattling. Somewhere, a siren rose and fell like a tired animal. Arthur spoke softly beside her. "He's going to fight," he said. "He'll claim retaliation. He'll say you embarrassed him." Vivian's eyes stayed on the wet street. "Let him," she said. "The paper trail doesn't care about ego." Arthur's jaw tightened. "There will be questions. From the board, from the press, from employees." Vivian nodded once. "Yes." Arthur hesitated, then asked what he had been carrying all day. "Why did you wear that plain dress last night?" he said. "Why put yourself in that position?" Vivian's fingers tightened slightly around the umbrella handle, though it wasn't her hand holding it. Rain tapped the canopy above them with steady insistence. She didn't answer immediately. She watched a thin stream of water run along the curb, carrying a cigarette butt, a scrap of paper, a torn receipt. The city's waste always moved somewhere else. She didn't want the company to do the same with its rot, because invisibility shows truth, she said at last. Because when good people hide, bad people grow bold. Arthur's face tightened with something like shame. He looked away. Vivian stepped toward the waiting car that would take them back downtown. The driver opened the door. Warm air spilled out. Before she got in, she looked up at the building across the street, a dark window reflecting her shape. In that reflection, she saw the quiet leader she had chosen to be for years, and she saw what it had allowed. No more hiding, she said, mostly to herself. Arthur heard it anyway. His posture straightened. Back at headquarters, the 41st floor was still lit. Screens still glowed. Catherine Pierce waited with her tablet like a blade. The moment Vivian entered the conference room again, the hum of servers seemed louder, as if the building itself was listening. "We can contain the immediate damage," Catherine said. "We have enough for the DA. The auditors are already on the way. But culture," Vivian held up a hand. "Culture is the point." She walked to the head of the table and set her palm flat on the smooth wood. The gesture grounded the room, made it clear this wasn't just cleanup. It was surgery. "Bring the whistleblower files back up," she said. "The people who were fired for trying to report this." Catherine nodded. Tapping. A list appeared on the screen. Names, dates, termination codes, cold administrative language disguising human loss. Vivian's eyes sharpened. "Rehire them." Publicly. Arthur's gaze flicked to her, surprised. "Publicly." "Yes," Vivian said. "Quiet fixes are how rot returns. I want the company to see what honesty costs and what it earns." Catherine hesitated. "And Peter Vance." Vivian's face stayed still, but the anger beneath it was controlled steel. "Peter will be escorted in," she said, "with NYPD waiting in the lobby. No warnings, no soft landings." Arthur inhaled, then nodded. "Understood." Vivian looked at the glowing screen, at the neat boxes and arrows that mapped greed. She thought of the ballroom again, not as humiliation, but as evidence. A room full of power that had mistaken volume for authority. A room she had watched for years from the edges. She lifted her chin. "Schedule a town hall," she said. "Today. Bring everyone in, and stream it." Arthur's eyes widened slightly. "That will shake the building." "Good," Vivian said. "It needs shaking." She picked up her coffee from earlier and took a sip. It was cold now, stale on her tongue. She didn't put it down gently. The mug met the table with a firm, deliberate thud. Then she spoke with quiet certainty, as if signing the next chapter into existence. "There will be no invisible people at Ethelgard anymore." The atrium of Ethelgard Tower had never been designed for warmth. It was a canyon of glass and steel, meant to make people feel small and productive. That morning it was packed shoulder to shoulder, bodies filling every inch of polished floor. The air smelled like damp coats, coffee breath, and the faint ozone of electronics overheating under too many live stream connections. Above the crowd, a giant screen glowed with the same corporate logo employees saw every day. But the room didn't feel corporate. It felt alive, restless, afraid of the truth, and hungry for it. Vivian stood behind a simple podium set at the base of the staircase. No velvet, no chandeliers, just bright white lighting and a microphone that made every breath audible. She wore a plain white blouse, clean and unpretentious. The fabric didn't shimmer. It didn't need to. Her glasses caught the atrium lights in thin lines. Arthur stood slightly behind and to her left. Catherine Pierce waited on the other side with a folder held tight to her chest. Security and police were present but kept back, careful not to turn the moment into theater. A quiet hum came from the crowd. Thousands of small noises stitched together, shoes shifting, phones vibrating, a throat clearing, the soft ding of an elevator, opening and closing somewhere far above. Vivian stepped to the mic. The feedback squealed for half a second, then settled. The sound cut through the atrium like a knife, and the crowd stilled. "Good morning," Vivian said. Her voice wasn't loud. The microphone did the work. The calm did the rest. "For years," she continued, "I believed the work would speak for itself. I believed integrity could stay quiet and still win." She paused, letting the silence hold. People leaned in without realizing they were doing it. "I was wrong," she said. "When good people hide, bad people take charge." Arthur's throat tightened. He looked down for a beat, then back up. The crowd didn't cheer. They listened with the intensity of people who had lived under a weight they hadn't been allowed to name. Vivian's gaze traveled across the sea of faces. She saw the ones in branded hoodies, the ones in worn cardigans, the ones with lanyards that had been yanked by security gates too many times. She saw eyes that looked exhausted, and eyes that looked angry, and eyes that looked relieved, to finally be addressed like they mattered. "Grant Miller is gone," she said. "But firing one man is not a solution. It is a symptom treated with silence." She lifted one hand and gestured toward the side of the stage. Her palm stayed open, inviting rather than commanding. 3 people stepped out. They moved cautiously at first, as if they still expected to be stopped. They were dressed like employees, not executives. One held their hands clasped so tightly the knuckles were white. Another kept blinking hard, as if fighting tears. The third's jaw was set with quiet resolve. Vivian turned slightly to face them, and something softened in her posture. Not sentimentality, recognition. "These 3 were fired 2 months ago," she said, "for trying to report misconduct." A ripple moved through the crowd, a low wave of shock and anger. They were silenced. Vivian continued. "Today, they are rehired." The atrium did not clap politely. It erupted. The sound was a roar of relief, anger, vindication, and something almost like grief releasing. The noise bounced off the glass walls and returned doubled. People raised their hands. Some shouted names. Others just exhaled, shoulders dropping for the first time in a long time. Vivian held steady through it, letting it happen, letting the building hear its own heartbeat. When the applause began to settle, she spoke again, voice cutting cleanly through the fading roar. "From this moment forward, there are no invisible people at Ethelgard," she said. "Not in the lobby, not in the call center, not in the boardroom." She paused, and the silence snapped back into place. "My door is on the 40th floor," she said. "It will remain open." Arthur's eyes flicked toward her, a mixture of admiration and regret. He had been the face. She had been the quiet spine. Now the spine was stepping into light. Vivian leaned slightly closer to the microphone. The metal stand creaked softly, a small sound amplified by stillness. "If you see something wrong, you report it," she said. "If someone tries to punish you for it, you report that too. Silence is not safety. Silence is permission." The words landed hard. People nodded. People swallowed. Someone near the front wiped their eyes with the heel of their hand, embarrassed and unashamed at once. Vivian stepped back from the mic. The crowd surged into another wave of applause, but she didn't linger to bathe in it. She turned her head toward Arthur and spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. We have work to do. Arthur nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Later, across the city, a different kind of silence lived in a small boutique on a side street in Soho. The store smelled like lavender, cleaner, and old leather, a carefully curated version of luxury. Racks held designer bags under soft lighting. A small bell chimed as Tiffany Street Claire stepped in. Her hair was pulled back in a hurried knot. No diamonds, no entourage. She clutched the scarlet dress in a garment bag, like it was evidence of a life she still wanted to claim. At the counter, a woman with flint eyes took the bag without smiling. Her hands were efficient, practiced. She pulled the dress out, held it up, and examined the seams. Her fingers moved along the hem with the same cold precision Vivian had used, except this time there was no audience to impress. Tiffany forced a laugh that sounded brittle. "It's vintage Versace," she said. "My fiancé paid $6,000. The shop owner didn't look up. She pinched the label between two fingers and gave it a small tug. The adhesive resisted, then shifted slightly. "The stitching is wrong," the owner said flatly. "The label is glued. It's a polyester blend." Tiffany's face tightened. "No, you're mistaken." The owner slid the dress back across the counter like it was just fabric. "I'll give you $20. Tiffany stared at her. Her mouth opened, then closed. The number didn't fit in her head. 20 wasn't a discount. 20 was an insult. 20, she whispered. The owner's gaze hardened. "Then, get a job." Tiffany's breath caught. For a moment, she looked around the boutique as if it might turn back into the ballroom if she wished hard enough. But the racks stayed racks. The soft lighting stayed soft. Reality didn't bend. She shoved the dress back into the garment bag with shaking hands and stumbled out onto the sidewalk. The cold air hit her face like a slap. Her phone buzzed in her palm. She glanced down. An eviction notice. The words were simple. The consequences were not. Tiffany's fingers tightened until the phone creaked slightly in its case. She looked at the garment bag, then at the street. People moved past her without looking. No one recognized her. No one cared. A subway entrance yawned at the corner. A warm gust of underground air rolled up, smelling of metal and damp concrete. Tiffany hesitated, then walked toward it, shoulders hunched, head down. Back at Ethelgard Tower, the crowd in the atrium slowly dispersed, but the building felt different. People looked at each other longer. They held doors. They spoke with less fear in their eyes. Vivian stood alone for a moment near the podium after most had gone, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the lectern. The bright lights made the glass around her glitter, but she didn't look up. She listened to the residual hum of the building, the soft ding of elevators, the distant echo of footsteps. Systems had sounds. So did cultures. Arthur approached quietly. "How does it feel to be seen?" he asked. Vivian lifted her gaze. Her expression was calm, almost tired. "It feels fine," she said. Then she looked past him, toward the lobby doors, where an employee in a plain coat stood uncertainly near the edge of the marble, clutching a purse like a shield. Vivian's eyes softened a fraction. She stepped away from the podium and walked toward the employee, her shoes making a steady, simple sound on the polished floor. The final image didn't need a speech. It didn't need applause. Power, when it was real, moved quietly, and it watched.